This is the LatinNews Podcast. I am your host, Richard McCall, here in Bogota, Colombia. Our very special guest this week is in Montevideo, in Uruguay. It's Dr. Ignacio Bartesaghi. He's a doctor of international relations, the director of the Instituto de Negocios Internacionales at the Universidad Católica del Uruguay. And this week we're going to be discussing Mercosur, the trade agreement, the trade policies out of this part of Latin America. And I can think of no one better to speak about this. He's authored a book on the topic. He's continually asked to interviews and to explain the situation. Ignacio, welcome on the LatinNews Podcast.
Thank you, Richard. It's a pleasure for me.
No, this is our pleasure indeed to talk to you about Mercosur. Perhaps we could start with the basics. Where does Mercosur find itself right now in February 2025?
Mercosur, Richard, that Mercosur is crossing a crisis, a structural crisis, because the problem is that what we write in the agreements, in the regional agreements, the objectives of the regional agreements, we never achieve that. So Mercosur, that was launched in 1991, and if you read the Asunción Treaty, you read the Article 1, for example, we must achieve the objectives of the European Union. We must build a common market, we must build a customs union, but we never achieved that. So we spent more than 30 years of history without achieving our original objectives. So the problem is that Mercosur now, in nowadays, is more popular because we closed the agreement with the European Union, so that is international succeed. But in the internal objectives, we are a free trade zone with a lot of problems and exceptions. We are economic integration processes that is in force, of course, is working, but it's not working like the papers told us 30 years ago that we must work. So I think that is the more important issue to understand. When we talk about Mercosur, we have two Mercosurs. The Mercosur of the original treaties, the Mercosur that we have in the papers, but the Mercosur of reality. Mercosur of reality is totally different of Mercosur of the papers. And that is part of the discussion. And that is why we are always trying to compare with the European Union, but at the end it's impossible because the European Union is working like a customs union, is working like an union, it's more than a customs union, no? Because also you have also the euro, and in the case of Mercosur, we are in another level. We never achieve that important objective. So that is one of the most important problems of Mercosur. What we want to do, because after 30 years, maybe we must have a discussion about a reform of Mercosur. We must have a discussion about, we are going to be a customs union in any moment, we're going to be a common market, or we must to sign a new treaty. We must to be aware that the partners don't want to achieve that goals. That is the most important discussion now, and also it's part of the discussion between Lula and Milei.
You brought up a lot of issues there of what was written in 1991, obviously, and what is relevant today in 2025. And this brings me to the point is you've got free trade developments with the EU, and in 2024 in December, it seemed like something was going to be signed. It seemed like this agreement was going to be pushed across the line, but is it going to happen? Because there's the opposition from EU farmers, there's the European demand for Mercosur's beef, but of course environmental considerations such as deforestation. Will Mercosur be able to change its policies and evolve into a new look deal?
Yes, I think that Mercosur is able to do that. We need time. We need cooperation. We need support from the European Union to be able to have that new compromise in environmental issues or in other regulations that, as you know, Richard, are very hard in the European Union.
Yeah.
But what happens in Montevideo summit last December was very strong. Why? Because the picture is very strong. Ursula von der Leyen here in Montevideo, and the picture is also very strong because you sent a message to Trump. The European Commission is sending a message to Trump. When you ask in Brussels, why now Europe closed this agreement? Because this agreement is more than 20 years of negotiations. Yes, because we need to send a message to Trump. We need to have new partners, and we need to deepen our relation with new partners because the international new context of Trump that is already ongoing. We can see what is going on with Trump. So this is one important thing of the picture that happens in December. But also Milei and Lula for the first time, Richard, in the picture. This is also important for Lula, for Brazil. It was a victory for Brazil. So then the agreement, yeah, we need time. You need the legal review. You need at least 6-7 months for that. Another 6-7 months to the translation of the languages of the European Union, more than 20 different languages. So you need more time for that. You need the discussion in the European Council, where you have to talk with France. That's, as you know, it's totally, you have the position of this agreement, not only France, also Poland and other countries, Ireland and other countries. We need to know what is going to happen with Italy. It's important to reach the necessary votes of the European Council. Then you need a discussion in the European Parliament, where it's going to be complicated, Richard, because you have on the side of Mercosur a Milei that is against about all the 2030 agenda of the UN. And you know that for Europe, that agenda is very important. And for the Parliament, that agenda is very important. So you're going to have a Milei that is similar in this case to Trump in that position. I don't want this agenda. This agenda is not going. No. So maybe in the European Parliament we have also some discussions, but I think that anyway this situation is not comparable with 2019 situation. That, as you know, we closed already the agreement, and then because of the Green Deal in Europe, they started a new negotiation because of the sustainability issues and environmental aspects. Okay, now we add in the sustainability chapter, we add new compromises in that sense. We accept that as Mercosur. And we ask Europe to change some things in other chapters. That was part of the negotiation, and that was okay. Now we need to wait. We need, if we solve the problem in France, if we solve the problem of the farmers in Europe, but it's a Europe problem. From our side, Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, and Uruguay will sign the agreement. No problem. Even Milei. Okay, Milei is not saying this is not my agreement. I think that is not going to happen. I want to go with Trump, and I wanted to have my free trade agreement with Trump. That is Milei idea. But he will sign anyway this agreement. So all the tension is from the Europe side. And the problem there, Richard, is that at the end, I think that the problem in Europe is not the Mercosur European Union agreement. It's an internal problem.
Yeah.
The discussion in Europe about so hard regulations is another discussion. The discussion in France about agriculture is another discussion, because Mercosur products, agricultural products, are not going to increase a lot in Europe. That is not going to happen. And agriculture in Europe is not so important in terms of the economy. Agriculture in Europe is not so important in terms of France. It's important in terms of society, migration, internal migration, and other issues. So what we can see from this side is that they are saying things that will happen because of trade, of this agreement, that's not going to happen. We're not going to invite all Europe with our products in agriculture, and also in the industrial products are not going to invite Mercosur markets. So I think that this discussion is very complicated because it's about other issues. It's about other things that are going through Europe and the relation between the European Commission administration and the time of the partners of the European Union, of the countries, of the members, that in some cases they need more time to adapt or to deal with so high regulations. Because, as you know, Richard, Europe wanted to be in the number one of all the regulations around the world. So that has impacts in Europe and in the farmers of Europe, because they can use so chemical to produce because it's forbidden, but that is not forbidden around the world. So we can use it, but Europe cannot use it. So they lose competitiveness because the chemicals that they can use, or agrochemicals that they can use, the farmers are more higher than what we use here. The discussion is okay, the discussion, but the problem is more from the Europe side than from Mercosur side, from my point of view.
So the Mercosur side is obviously, you're saying, far more flexible, far more open to dealing, and the issues come from within Europe and the European Union, and of course the geopolitical situation over there, which is the tensions that are, as you would say, the push and pull of different tensions and the economies within the European Union. And you mentioned the countries, of course, who are opposing any agreement. You mentioned the French, the Austrians, Poland, the Netherlands, but then you have two big economies like Germany and Spain who are in favor. You say that maybe Italy, we haven't seen where they're going. There's so much going on, and of course any ratification will be blocked if the countries making up 35% of the population of the bloc are in opposition, and so it's Mercosur just watching and waiting, I suppose.
Yeah, we're watching and waiting. Now there are some, for example, the foreign minister of Uruguay is having a discussion now in Brussels. So they wanted to have information about the process. So the process is ongoing or is already stopped? No, the process is ongoing, but it's not from our side. The decision of Italy, if Italy is going to support or not, because in that 35 you are saying, Richard, Italy is the breaking point, Italy. So we have to imagine what are going to be the concessions of the European Commission and Ursula von der Leyen to Meloni about, okay, support me in this, then I will give you some exceptions in migration, exceptions in all other policies that Meloni wanted to talk with Europe, and the same with other countries. And that is an internal discussion that is far away in Mercosur. So that is the important and complication thing for us. It's like a picture that we see the picture, but we are not actors because it's going to be at the end a decision of Europe in a new international context. Last week I read a speech of Macron that said something incredible. The future of France and Europe will be with Latin American countries. That is incredible, Richard, because if the future of France and Europe will be with Latin American, oh please, Macron, close this free trade agreement with Mercosur. That is so important in terms of cooperation, because this is important to tell you. The impact in terms of economics, in terms of GDP, in terms of trade, is not so huge of this agreement. It's small. The impact will be more important in geopolitical issues, especially for Europe, because Europe has a great problem in the moment. Europe is in the middle of the geopolitical war between China, and the US, and is not part of that party. And Europe is going to be more complicated in this issue if the solution of Trump in the war of Ukraine will not take in account the opinion of Europe. Will solve this problem only with Putin, and they will inform China. So what is the role of Europe? So in that new international context, Europe needs new partners, strategic partners. And this is the policy that the European Commission wanted to achieve with Africa and with Latin America. They need Latin American countries. And for our countries, for Mercosur countries, if Europe wanted to have a new kind of relation with us, and they wanted to compete with China, that won a lot of space from the US and Europe in the last 2 decades, okay, give me something. Give me something. Not only you can say me, you need to achieve my regulations. No. Please, slowly. I wanted to achieve that regulation because we are aware about climate change.
Mm-hmm.
We are aware about climate change in Mercosur, but we are also aware that we are not developed economies. We are developing economies. So to reach this kind of regulations, so difficult to achieve for us, we need time, we need support, we need cooperation, because you are the rich economy. We are not rich economy. In that discussion is also important, the time. We wanted to go there. And the discussion of I think that part of the world is to go there and to take in account of what is going on in environmental issues. But the key issue is the time and the support you will give me to go to that point.
It's incredible. I mean, I'm in Colombia, you're in Uruguay, but it's incredible to think of Macron saying that Latin America is, the future. Of course, Macron in his incredibly weak position, but it still means a lot. It still means a lot to have that, to not be the kind of forgotten continent, which in many ways we often feel. But you've been bringing in the whole sort of geopolitical conversation into this. And of course, you've mentioned President Trump and you've mentioned President Milei in Argentina and this relationship that they appear to have. You never know. But Milei, of course, would sign a Mercosur agreement with the European Union. He's far more pragmatic than we can imagine from the images. Because we know that there's Chinese investment and deals with Argentina, and of course Milei says he won't work with communists, but of course he's too pragmatic to cancel anything there. So I wonder. I think Milei could obviously make some influence and have some influence with Meloni in Italy. The politically aligned kind of thing with Trump as well. But how? One of the things that really always jumps out is what was written in that original treaty ruling out bilateral trade between member states of Mercosur and third parties. This, because of course Milei, and Trump, Milei wants a free trade agreement straight with Trump. Of course, this would go against the remit within Mercosur, and Uruguay has been pushing for a deal with China for some time. Mm-hmm. Can we see the original treaty being modified to benefit member states independently of one another?
It's a very important question. Uruguay tried, as you said, Richard, to sign an agreement with China. And the negotiation of this government, the Lacalle-Pou government, was to try to push a reform in the treaty, or to have a kind of authorization, a kind of fast track to, okay, Uruguay, you can sign with China. We don't want, but you can sign. We tried that with Bolsonaro administration and with Guedes in particular, that was in force of, Itamaraty wasn't so in force of the international relations in these aspects. Guedes was important in that issue, and the conversations with Brazil was okay. Maybe I will accept a free trade agreement with Uruguay only with China, like the first step, and then we can see if the whole Mercosur will sign this agreement as a whole. This discussion was ongoing. We signed a factibility study with China about the impacts of future free bilateral trade agreement. And then Lula appears. Lula won the elections. And Lula vision and international view of Lula is totally different from Bolsonaro. Brazil wanted to be the leader of Mercosur, wanted to be the country that has the relation with the bigger economies. And okay, the first conversation with Lacalle Pou was, Uruguay, you don't hurry, no, please, you're in a rush, don't worry. We're going to close with Europe, and then whole Mercosur will close with China free trade agreement. The message was very clear. Uruguay, you're not going to do this alone. It's my decision. It's not your decision. And that message was, of course, sent to China, like saying, okay, you are trying to talk with Uruguay in a bilateral way. This is not going to happen. If we close an agreement, will be as a whole. Why? Because we are in technical view, we are a custom union. We need to negotiate all together. It's not possible to go alone. That is in the technical, in the theoretical. If you read the papers, yes, you read that, but we never achieve that objective. We are a thing. We operate like another thing. We are not a custom union. But that discussion is, okay, at the end, Brazil is saying that to China. China said to Uruguay, okay, so now Brazil is telling me that we're going to be all together. So we will wait Brazil. But Brazil at the end wanted with China everything, Richard. Wanted BRICS, wanted policy, wanted cooperation, wanted investment, wanted everything, not trade, not free trade. Brazil is not thinking in open economy with China. Argentina of Milei is not thinking to open the economy with China because, as you said, is focused in the possibility to sign a free trade agreement with Trump administration. The difference between the two situations are that in the case of Milei, imagine that Trump called Milei or travel to Buenos Aires and tell Milei, okay, let's sign a free trade agreement. Milei is not going to ask Lula, I can. No, Milei is going to jump to that swimming pool because he's from on the other side. Is the US, is Trump, and is Milei. Then we have to imagine if Milei is going to go out Mercosur, how is going to be the discussion in Argentina that has very strong industrial relations with Brazil in terms of interregional trade. The discussion, we don't know. But the decision of Milei, for sure, is going to be, okay, I will jump to that swimming pool, to that opportunity. So I think that the discussion to reform Mercosur to be more flexible is not going to happen because we don't have conversation between Lula and Milei. So it's not possible to open this negotiation. It's necessary? Yes. Is the opinion of Uruguay? Yes. It was the opinion of this government in Uruguay? Yes. But in the case of this new reality, what we can see is that Milei is going to break Mercosur in force, not in legal discussion, because if he has the opportunity of a free trade agreement with the US, he will he will say yes, and then he will start another problem, that is how he will solve Mercosur issue.
It's this practical or impractical relationship between Milei and Lula right now. I'm thinking right back to that photo opportunity last year, which looked a little bit staged. They did not look happy alongside one another, and this is as you are stating. Obviously, it's a real obstacle to a productive Mercosur. This relationship or lack of relationship between Lula and Milei. How do you see this playing out? Because obviously, rather than their political ideologies, they need to work together. The two countries are, pivotal to one another.
Totally. The backstage of that picture of the Montevideo summit, it was incredible because Lacalle Pou need to ask Milei, please, can you stay here in the picture? Because Milei wanted to be in that picture with Lula. So it was very strong negotiation with La Calle Pou, telling Milei, please stay here, please let catch our hands. Incredible, no?
Yeah.
One picture, but the message is very clear.
Yeah.
In the history, because Mercosur started in the 90s, 1991, we signed the Asunción Treaty, but the history of Mercosur started before, in the 80s, and started in a very important and strong relation between Sarney and Alfonsín, Argentina and Brazil and Argentina. In that moment, they started to close different agreements, and also related with safe agreements also. Because the agreements that they started to sign in the 80s were very important for the peace of the region. So the relation between Argentina and Brazil is very strong, not only in trade. These are really natural partners. So when you can see that no conversation is at, of course, that in other levels things are happening between Argentina and Brazil, but the problem is that the president of Argentina and the president of Brazil, they're not having a conversation, and you need conversations. If you in any discussion of Mercosur, you need Brazil and Argentina having the conversation, because I always say the same, that Mercosur is Argentina and Brazil decision, and then they communicate that decision to Paraguay and Uruguay. Okay, that is Mercosur. Always they reach a decision and they inform us the decision, and we accept that. And now it's more complicated because Mercosur include new members, include Venezuela, that now is suspended, but Venezuela is totally different economy, social, cultural, nothing with Mercosur countries, but because of policy reasons, because of that time ago, because of Lula, and because of Dilma Rousseff, and because the Kirchner in Argentina, and because in our case Mujica, they decided to, Lugo, remember Lugo in Paraguay, they decided to have a Mercosur more like a policy forum and not like an economic integration process. So they decided Venezuela must go in, and now Bolivia is also a full member of Mercosur, and that is more complicated because we add more problems to Mercosur. This is a family, a couple that have a lot of problems and decided to have more child to solve the problems. It's not correct. So we need to solve our problems. We need to discuss about what Mercosur we want in the future. We need to discuss if it is possible to have a Mercosur more flexible, because it's impossible to have the same opinion about if we wanted to go with China, with the US, with Europe, with Japan. So if we cannot have only one view about the internalization of Mercosur, we need more flexibility, and that is part of the discussion. But to have that discussion, we need Argentina and Brazil having the conversation, and that is not going to happen. It's not happening at the moment, and I think that, Richard, this is not going to happen the next month because Lula is not comfortable because of the relation between Milei and Trump. We don't know this relation. We see this relation in the media. It's very okay. We don't know, but it's a relation with Elon Musk. It's a relation with Marco Rubio. It's a relation that is we are waiting what is going to happen with that relation. But imagine Lula in that situation.
Yeah,
it's not comfortable, Lula, because the leader of the relation of all Latin American countries is Argentina, not Brazil. So that problem is also part of the difficulties to have Brazil and Argentina having this conversation.
See that shifting, let's say, of the spokesperson for this region, with the US being Milei and no longer being Brazil, is a big deal, and is obviously playing into the polarization between the two countries and within their own domestic politics. Indeed, the relationship between Milei and Trump at this point in time, I think we could probably suggest it's more mediatic, but But who knows where it goes? I mean, who knows where the predictability on this one goes? If we go back just slightly and look at the EU agreement or the proposed EU agreement, what do you feel it would mean for Mercosur if and when this deal is signed and goes through?
For Mercosur, it's like a new stage, because the more important thing that happens to Mercosur in the last 20 years was this agreement.
Yeah.
Was the sign of this agreement. It's not enforced, but anyway, it was the more important thing in 20 years. Why? Because Mercosur dynamic is so stable, it's so problematic that when you signed an agreement with Europe, because it's Europe, it's the European Union. It's not it's a really important economy. It's a really important actor in international relations. And so it's like in football, Richard. It's like playing in the B, Liga B, no, and start to play in A. It's given more life, more for Mercosur if this is going to be enforced, and also Mercosur will want credibility if we have this agreement, because this is also very studied around the world. But when you sign an agreement, you catch the attention of other economies.
Yeah.
So if this agreement will be put in force, Japan, South Korea, China, okay, they will knock the door Mercosur. Okay, I want an agreement with you. So this will have another impact in the image of Mercosur around the world. And that is important because the credibility of Mercosur has a lot of problems. Of course, the whole world is looking through the television what is going on in Brazil and Argentina, and what is going on with Argentina and Milei. But if really you close this agreement, I think that the position of Mercosur will be another. It will be the most important thing after the close of the protocol, Europreto protocol that we closed in 1994. So it's really important for the future of Mercosur. It's not only because the impacts in the economy. It's not because this is going to be, okay, now we close this agreement and we're going to export a lot and our GDP is going to increase and Mercosur will transform in a developed bloc. No, it's not that. It's not about that kind of impact. It's about the other important things and opportunities that will be open with this agreement in this international context where Europe needs new allies. So this is what I think is going to happen. It's difficult to talk about this kind of impacts because our methodology, when we work in studies of the impacts of trade, is more easier to say, okay, we will increase our export and the imports in this amount, and GDP is going to increase this amount. It's okay. But when you talk about geopolitical issues, policy issues, cooperation, future investments in new areas, for example, green hydrogen, critical minerals, all these kind of things that are part of the new discussion in the international agenda, Europe and Latin American countries, Europe and Mercosur, together, it's an important discussion. So for Mercosur, it's totally important to have the opportunity to put in force this agreement, and I think that will give more years of life.
Definitely. Your football, obviously, metaphor there, it's like playing with the big boys, coming up against the big boys. But I see it more as a maturity on the world stage. There's this acceptance. It's a signed off with Europe. As you say, the consequences are greater than the actual deal, because then the other countries start looking at it and saying, oh, they're serious. You know, it's working. I can understand that entirely. And you say your last comment there, it gives it sort of a longer lifespan because, well, I mean, if the deal doesn't go through, I mean, Mercosur is going to, suffer an existential crisis.
Yeah, totally, of course, yes, and you add Milei's position to that, because if this agreement never will put in force, Milei is going to say, okay, so I can go with the US, I can open because nothing happens. We close an agreement that will never be enforced. So at the end, they are not agreements. So yes, the critical situation of Mercosur, if in the next year we don't have information that the process is ongoing, Milei is going to push and push more and more the necessary of a reform of Mercosur. And because in the view of Milei, he wanted to have an open economy, and he's running for that. And in the case of Paraguay, totally different. Paraguay is comfortable in this situation. It's always comfortable in this situation because Paraguay has a strong relation with Brazil. Paraguay is catching investments because the low prices of production in Paraguay. So Paraguay is increasing. It's not a problem. For Uruguay, yes, it's a problem. But on the other hand, the next government of Presidency Orsi has a different view compared with Lacalle Pou. Why? Because he's more near Lula and he is more near Mercosur and he wanted a Mercosur altogether. So Orsi, next president of Uruguay, is not going to push flexibility of Mercosur. It's not going to support Milei in all the ideas of Milei. It's going to support Lula. So this is going to be like maybe Milei is going to be alone. But it's not alone because he's alone maybe with Trump. So, or maybe with Elon Musk deciding some important investments in Argentina. You never know. At the moment, at the moment, this is a history for media and for a nice movie at the moment. But we can have some results in the next months. And of course, all other members of Mercosur are paying attention to that situation. No?
And finally, you obviously you mentioned the expansion of Mercosur to include, suspended Venezuela and Bolivia. Is there a move maybe to include further countries?
I don't. The idea of Brazil always was to include more countries because Mercosur is small for Brazil. Brazil always needs whole South America. Remember UNASUR, Richard?
Yeah.
The idea of UNASUR is not an Argentinian idea. It's a Brazilian idea because Brazil wanted to be like the representative of South America to have a role in the UN, Council, and but for that, Brazil needs more than Mercosur.
Yeah.
So the idea of UNASUR, there was to have more and more countries. And yes, Panama is going to be part of Mercosur, but not like a full member, like associate member, like a full member. I think that it's not going to happen. Bolivia, it's okay. In the future, maybe Colombia, but I think it's not going to happen. It depends. But for Brazil to add Venezuela and to add Bolivia was a political victory.
Yes.
Because Brazil wanted also always to represent South America. I am the leader of South America, and that is the reason because I need to have a seat in the UN Permanent Council because I have the voice of all these countries. That is not true. At the moment, it's not true. I think that the worst international policy of Brazil in the history, Richard, was that Brazil never achieved the real representation of the whole South American countries. Yeah. And that is incredible. So Brazil needs to work more in that, to give more concessions and to have, now he is leading with Argentina. Argentina is the natural partner of Brazil, but now Milei is fighting with Lula in that issue. So it's a real problem for the future of Brazil decisions.
I see that obviously that Brazilian situation is painful for Lula and Brazil, of course. I only ask about the expansion. Panama, of course, a very interesting prospect because especially in the light of the recent visit by Marco Rubio, and of course his thinly veiled explanations that Panama have to stop doing so much business or permitting so much business with China, and of course recent events of Colombia being made the example of. Any pushback against Trump, as correct or incorrect as wherever you stand politically, we have a lame duck president in Colombia, in Gustavo Petro right now. But Colombia, for example, has always put all of its eggs into a trade deals with Colombia, and they're going to have to look elsewhere. I mean, that's why I would think that Mercosur is very attractive for other Latin American countries.
Yeah. Oh, and I think that in the case of Mexico now, with the problem that is going on through Trump decisions, moreover than this month that they are going to wait and to negotiate if they put or not the tariffs. Yes, I think that in this new international contact with Trump, Mexico, Canada, they will look more to Latin American countries. They will look more to Brazil, maybe. Why not? Or to Mercosur. Canada, for example, we have a negotiation with Canada, Mercosur Canada. Maybe now Canada will say, okay, I need to rush in this negotiation because I have Trump, so I need to sell my products to other place. So that is part of things that I think is going to happen. And about Panama, it's important also because the trade relations of Mercosur with Central American are very slow, Richard. We have a lot of opportunities to increase our relation with Central American countries.
Yeah.
So the accession of Panama, like associate member, is a very good news and a first step maybe to involve other countries of Central America to be part of Mercosur.
This is it. It comes back to that maturity and, of course, the consequences of almost an effective signing with Europe, which would get other countries to sit up and look at Mercosur. I think it's a fascinating time to be involved in Latin America, especially obviously with what is going on in North America. There could be more, let's say, North America, Central, South, if we including Mexico, of course. There could be more agreements in coming months and coming years. It's definitely something to watch. Can I just take this moment to say thank you so much to Dr. Ignacio Bartesaghi for his time and insights on what is going to be, I would say, a very, very pivotal year for Mercosur, thinking of the European Union, the free trade agreement there, and potential maturity of this trade bloc in order to negotiate and, of course, create new alliances across the world. Dr. Ignacio Bartesaghi is the Doctor of International Relations. He's a director of the Instituto de Negocios Internacionales at the Universidad Católica del Uruguay. Thank you so much for being on the LatinNews Podcast.
Thank you, Richard. It was a pleasure.
My pleasure's all mine. Remember, everyone, to share, obviously, the LatinNews Podcast, talk about it, and we'll be back in a fortnight's time discussing further elements and issues from the region. Thank you again, and goodbye.